Hello guys, this is Tynrael. Welcome back to another episode of Kerbal Space Program New Horizons. Today's episode is going to be a combination of a few things, but it's mostly going to be preparing. You can see here I have Laythe in the background. Nice blue planet with an atmosphere. There's actually 3 planets that I'm going to be sending probes to. Lave, Laythe, and I had a request to fact track Titanus, which is pretty far away. It has very high gravity. It's 2.5 for gravity, and the atmosphere is 9 atmospheres, so it's very hostile. But I'm going to send probes to start scanning all 3 of these planets to prepare for actual manned missions. I'm doing this now because you can see I have efficient transfer to Laythe coming up in 26 days. I have Laythe, Titanus, and Lave transfers here scheduled to determine the Delta V to help me figure out how to build my vessels. I have 3 probes that have the same final probe stage, but the mid-transfer and the initial launch are all different based on the amount that they needed to get there. This is my largest probe to Titanus. You can see it's estimating about 15.8 meters a second Delta V. Because I start with mixed engines, using both the twin bores and the mainsail, the Delta V is off by a little. I think it's low by maybe 300 or 400 meters a second. I think I can get to orbit with more than maybe 12,500 Delta V. But I have 6 columns, 2 pairs of 3 to do a mini asparagus going into this central column, which will have very low thrust to weight ratio. It's going to be 0.28 in the atmosphere, so somewhere between 1.8 and or 0.18 and 0.28. So it's going to just barely finish off, and then I will have this mid stage here, which I'm estimating about 7,600 meters a second should be enough to get me to Titanus and hopefully do most of the slowing down. And it'll leave me with about 4,800 meters a second Delta V here in this lander, which has these side fuel tanks for a little bit more boost. I can then jettison them to be more fuel efficient while I maneuver to start scanning the surface with my satellites. And I also have this upper science stage, which is to collect data from the sun, the upper orbit and the lower orbit for Titanus, and then I can jettison it. And this small part that remains, I'm going to send into the atmosphere. I'm going to do that for all 3 of the planets at the end after they've scanned the surface. They're all the same. I don't know if 2 parachutes is going to be enough. My concern is parts heating up, and I'm not sure what I'd end up landing with. I know that once I extend these solar panels, I won't be able to retract them. I haven't unlocked the ones that I can retract, so I'm hoping that some of these static solar panels will make it to the surface if I am able to try a landing. So here is my Titanus probe. One thing I did not mention earlier is the cost of these missions. I had less than 900,000, and to launch all 3 of these rockets is going to cost about 750,000. So 240-ish thousand of that is going to be parts of this that I will not be able to recover. I was actually much more efficient getting up here than I had planned. I need to launch the other rockets and need the funds, so I'm going to jettison that stage and hope that it doesn't burn up in the atmosphere. So 11,926 meters a second to exit the influence of Kerbal, exit the influence of Sonnah, get to Titanus, hopefully slow down and get a polar orbit for scanning. I'm less concerned about being able to land and more concerned about collecting data. This is my Laythe probe. You can see it's very similar to the Titanus probe. They need similar amounts of delta V to get to. It is the Lave probe which actually needs less and has more differences. It appears that my initial stages are overbuilt quite a lot. I hope that I have enough extra compensation for the transfer in these upper stages as well. And last we have the Lave probe, which does not need as much fuel. It's the least expensive of all of these by more than 1,000. I need to reinforce those. Lave probe, take 2. And it appears I forgot to jettison this during the right time, so I'm going to use the entire tank to exit the Kerbal system. And I'll take it with me as space debris. For all of these rockets, I will be escaping the influence of Kerbal and then setting up maneuvers when I'm around the influence of Sonnah. So it appears that from here, the closest I can get to Titanus is 126 million meters away. The closest I can get to Lave is 76.4 million meters. So hopefully, partially on the route here, I will be able to adjust that and get closer. Ideally, something that also is more beneficial towards getting a polar orbit. I've been having a really hard time getting Laythe set up. I think that I might have missed the window for a good opportunity, and I might have to go several orbits around Sonnah and catch that one later, which is unfortunate because that's the one that I really need to get to for my man mission. So for Laythe, it looks like I can get as close as 39.6 million meters away in just over a day. So it looks like a lot of these will be burning around the same time. Hopefully they don't overlap too much during the burns, which actually are several minutes. So I'm probably going to have to start some burns and swap between some crafts while they're doing their burns, because I think some of them are 7 or 8 minutes. And it looks like they could overlap. Maybe they won't. I hope that they don't. Alright guys, I had built a 10-man base station. Very cheaply built. Just these 2 cabins and these 2 pods. And I was time warping my maneuver to Saren, and I ended up stuck because I had forgot to extend my panels. And so my probe core was dead because I wasn't sending anyone there. So I built this small vessel to come up and dock with the station so that it could extend the panels, and I figured I might as well send these tourists up with me. And it's very, very difficult to... In my previous docking experiences, I was able to rotate both ships, so I could just have one move towards the docking port of the other and go back and forth between them, and it would align them over time. This space station was dead and didn't rotate, so I had to get this ship in position to dock with it without using the RCS. And so I turned this engine down to 5.5, and I was literally translating to the left and to the right, and then at 0.1 meters a second, just so I can line it up. But the moral of the story is, if you're gonna send a probe, put some static, non-extending solar panels on, or extend these things as soon as you get to orbit. Otherwise, you'll time warp, your ship will get to a far-off planet, and then you realize that it's brain dead. So it turns out that I had never tried having multiple craft burning engines at the same time. Turns out you can't do that, which makes sense, but it did create quite a mess of my planned orbits. In addition to that, I found that within under 2 minutes or greater than 2 minutes with my slow engines, that the amount of acceleration or speed required drastically changed. 6 minutes out, it would say I'd have a 4-minute burn, so I'd start at 2 minutes, and then around 0, it would jump up to 4 minutes left after I'd burned for 2 minutes, so that really screwed up my maneuvers. I did end up with encounters for all 3 of my probes. You can see this one's slicing down that way, this one's going up way over here for Lave, and this one's going way out to Titanus. I used a lot more fuel than I intended, but my orbits are also worse. But what I ended up with is, right now I have 161 million periapsis for Lave, with only about 7k delta V left, which is okay, but the real bad one is Laythe. Getting the interior orbit for Laythe, I had to redo that every couple minutes. I had to do 6 burns before I actually got an encounter. And it's got a 74 million apoapsis, but I only have 5k delta V left to get captured and try to get a polar orbit, so I may not be able to have enough fuel to land there. Titanus was bad, because I had to break it into several pieces, because I tried swapping back and forth between Lave and Titanus and Lave and Titanus and burning some both directions, and I think it made them both worse. But I ended up with, as you can see here, a 656 million periapsis, but I do have almost 9,000 K delta V, so you can also see that these are going to take 27 to 34 days to get to. So hopefully I will do a couple contracts between then and try and increase some funds, because I had close to 1 million, now I have less than half that, so I need to recoup some costs, because I'm not going to be getting contract completions for either of these probes, or any of these probes. Okay guys, what I'm doing here is I'm going to explore the Space Center with this vessel loaded with experiments so that I can get some extra science. Because I haven't actually launched rockets to most of these places. Because I thought it would be better to use a rover when possible. I had retractable, or not retractable, but extending solar panels on this vessel, and as soon as I went over like 6 meters a second, they just exploded. So I had to go with the stock, or the non-mobile one. And this will probably take a little while because I'm going to send a copy of each experiment that's not worth 100% and then bring another version home. So I will time-lapse this. So in addition to going over 5 or 6 meters a second on the ground with the rover, causing solar panels or other loose parts to break off, it turns out that it's very easy to flip over rovers, at least this one that I have built. I guess it has a fairly narrow base, and it's definitely front-loaded, top-heavy with experiments. But I might have blown up my entire ship a couple times. And, well, this is just short clips of these different segments cut together. There's a lot of experiments that I am collecting, and this took a very long time. The amount of science that I get is worth it because I'm using Bob, but if I were just using a standard Kerbal, I'm not sure I would go through it with all of these experiments. I might have only just done like the standard mystery goo, materials bay, and material surface samples and that kind of thing. But I also hadn't actually driven through the Space Center before, so I see a lot of building components that I had never seen before, like the fact that these walls are propped up with beams, probably from prior explosions and other aircraft having collided with the side of the aircraft building. And I look forward to upgrading the administration building to where it has a pool, because I just think it's awesome that they're so well off that they have their own pool at the Space Center. Okay guys, I think that is all of the biomes here at the Space Center. Let's see how much we recover. 335 science. So that is more than we brought back in science that we didn't transmit from Saren when we actually landed there and sent 3 crafts to Saren to do that. So that's pretty awesome. With 487 science, I'll definitely be able to unlock some excellent research. So I'm aiming for Rock Arch 3 with this vessel experience machine. I have 7 Kerbals. I'm hoping to get one of the arches and pick up a Kerbal on Apter with the fuel that's left with this probably overdone asparagus staging. The rocket is pretty top heavy with those capsules up there. I hope that it's not too much of a problem. These reaction wheels are doing a fairly decent job of letting me maneuver. It was a little late in the evening when I was recording this moon segment of the episode, and so for some reason I went quiet and I stopped talking. But I end up wasting a whole lot of fuel just trying to get a landing near this archway. It's probably because of the slope. It's very hilly, and I overshot it, and then I flew back, and then I overshot that, and then I landed on an area that was too steep, so I had to accelerate up and then try landing somewhere else. And I have probably 2 or 3 pairs of my asparagus stage tanks are actually empty right now, and I'm only keeping them for the additional support for landing. And as you can see, I'm going a lot slower than I need to be because I just don't want my rocket to tip over. You can also see that there's a little bit of a cloud dust in the atmosphere, kind of obscuring Sonnah. I didn't realize that any of my cloud packs had added anything to the moon. I'm going to have to investigate that to see where that came from, because I didn't expect to see that. Another thing that I didn't realize is when I decided to send 7 Kerbals on a flag planting mission, how tedious it would be to actually transfer between all of the Kerbals and just keep positioning or transitioning back and forth between who's in control, what they're doing, and moving them around one at a time. It took a good amount of time to actually plant these flags and set up everything. Also, you can see that I should have built a ladder system so that they could climb down instead of releasing and jetting away and colliding into things and then bouncing across the surface for a good 2 minutes. But, I mean, this took a while, but it's easy. And they all get their flags and they get their experience, and it makes them happy. And like most Kerbals, they're always smiling and happy anyway. And some of them just love to bounce. I had intended to go to Aptor after this to rescue a stranded Kerbal and plant another set of flags. The problem is I have a very large vessel, and the only torque that I have is from the reaction wheels on my tanks as well as the probe core. And the probe core is not enough to effectively maneuver the central column of the ship. So by me wasting fuel aligning myself to this archway, I'm gonna have to jettison those tanks, and there's a nice screenshot. But I have to jettison the tanks because they're just empty, dead weight, and I also lose my reaction wheels, so I will not be able to get a landing on Aptor because my craft will come in at angles, I won't be able to rotate it, and I'll just bounce around and end up in a very poor situation. So instead of that, I just wrap this up, bring these guys home. I don't have it in here, but instead of going to Aptor, I did have a contract for a Sonnah 3 course where you fly by Sonnah, Saren, as well as the moon. So on the way home, I just created an encounter that flew me by Saren and kicked me back into an encounter with Kerbal, just for the additional bit of money for completing the contract. A successful landing in another location where you can see the northern lights. Where am I on the... Okay, so I'm on the northern part of the planet. I didn't realize that I had landed there. But now I have a little bit of science, I believe, and a lot of experience. I gained a little bit of science. And now I have some Kerbals leveling up to 2. Thank you guys for watching the series. I hope that you're enjoying it. Feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. We have now started sending vessels outside of the Sonnah system. The time to travel to those locations is increasing quite a lot, but we are halfway through the science tech system. We should be able to unlock more optimized parts, better experiments, and build better craft. So I look forward to going through all of that with you guys in future episodes. I will see you then.